cops and the paramedics were standing over me. And I went to the hospital that day, and they told me it was a seizure. But to this day, there was something darker in that moment. There was something that had possession of my body. That was far scarier than being paralyzed.
If you've ever wondered why we do ads on the podcast, it's because the revenue that we get from ads helps us keep the podcast alive and keep the podcast going. So we have decided that we are only going to do advertising for those who we just fully support and love. And one of those people is Mike from Mike's Auto Shack. You guys, I cannot tell you how amazing Mike is. He is the most genuine human being. He has been buying cars for people for over 28 years. It doesn't matter if you live in Florida, Texas, Utah, California. Mike will get you a car from your local auction. And so you don't have to travel too far to pick it up. And he only buys cars with a full factory warranty. So go register on his website, mikesautoshack.com. People on our team have personally purchased cars from Mike, and we just love him, and we love how much he loves the podcast. So go buy a car from Mike.
Josh, there is nothing that makes my heart just feel more joy than jumping on a podcast with somebody that's wearing their Comeback Podcast shirt and their Memoir men's chain.
Yes, thank you for that.
It looks so good. And I just, like, you're the first person I think I've interviewed that came on with their Comeback Podcast shirt on, and that is just legendary. I love it.
Yeah, Provo's event. I really had fun at the comeback event last fall. So.
Yeah, it was so good. We have another one coming up in October, and so you're gonna have to make it October 10th. Mark your calendar. All right. Well, let's get started. Tell us a little bit about like you, maybe like, a little background about you, and then we'll jump into your story.
Yeah, I told Britt, I was like, I'm a long story. I've told my story a few times, like being a guest speaker at places or in meetings, and my mom was like, I'm always running over time. So I'm Joshua Vargas. I prefer Joshua. Kind of one of those things, especially when I got sober and clean. It's like people asked me what I prefer, and there was just something about Joshua. Like Josh was casual. Josh was, didn't have direction. I was like, even though it doesn't seem like a big difference between Abram and Abraham, like he changed the name for some reason.
I love
that.
And I'm sorry I kept calling you Josh.
Yeah, that's fine. Most people do. So I'm originally from California, which I will kind of refer to as my Jerusalem. But my mom and dad were converts. My dad used to play in a band, or still plays in a band today, but he used to play at the church dances, and that's how my mom and dad got together. So they were converts. We were very active. My dad was very much the driving force in reading scripture, making sure we were going to church. I think whatever he was going to be involved in, he was going to be involved in it. And he made sure we were very active. And that's how I grew up. Very much the boys that were well known in the ward, and first there to set up, last there to take down. And there was a lot of expectations. I think we were, which I don't think I had a problem with. I had a pretty strong testimony. When I was like 7 years old, we went motorcycle riding in the lake beds of California one time, and my dad had gotten out of the truck, got around, walked to the back to undo the hatch, the tailgate. Me and my younger brother were in the truck at the time, and he didn't realize it, but he left the brake off. And so I just see the look on his face as the truck is starting to roll downhill and towards the little like drop off. And I just remember him chasing after the truck, my brother's freaking out, and I was starting to freak out. And I remember being in the truck and just like this calm presence that just suddenly came over me and was like, Joshua, turn the wheel. And I just remember looking at the wheel, not thinking about it, yanking it, and it's starting to go downhill, and it kind of curves back up. And he's able to run across and get the door open and pull the brake, and everything was fine the rest of the day. It wasn't until like the end of the day, my mom tells me that she's like, you wouldn't tell us why the truck just suddenly turned. And as a kid, I thought I wasn't supposed to touch anything behind the wheel. And I just remember at the end of the day telling them like, someone told me to. And, and it was like that moment from like being 7 years old. I remember having a testimony that day, that morning in that truck, God or one of his angels spoke to me, and he was absolutely real. And I carried that with me all throughout my young years and teenage years. But as we are teenagers and kids, I being from California, and I love my Lakers. I love basketball. I love Kobe. And that will play a part into my comeback part later. That I got obsessed with basketball, and I got obsessed with. I remember as a kid thinking, why would anybody want to go to work? Like, well, if you could get paid to play something, like, why not play? And so, like, that's what my focus is on. I had a visionary father, just like Lehigh. He had dreams, and he acted on those dreams. He married my mom because he had a dream about her. We ended up leaving the house in California and coming to Utah. We had missionaries over at our house probably once a week. And so when we came to Utah, we stayed with the missionaries' family. We moved around a lot. And so everywhere I went, I had my box of recorded tapes, and I rewatched games and Laker games and Kobe and moves. And when I go and try and emulate those moves. If it wasn't church, it was basketball on my mind. And everywhere I went, like I said, that's what I had. We would move, and we would always say, like, why don't we just go back to California? And I'll look back now at the story of Nephi and his brothers, and every time they would leave, go somewhere else, why don't we go back to Jerusalem, the land of our inheritance? I see that now. And so my senior year of high school, I had knee surgery. I played a lot of basketball. I kind of thought that would be the answer to all my problems. Whether it ended up me playing somewhere, but me being involved, coaching, just being around it, that's just what I wanted. If people ask me what I wanted to do, I might tell them, like, I want to be in the NBA, whatever that entailed. Like, I just wanted to be a part of it. And like I said, my dad being in a band his whole life, I don't think when I saw my dad, it was at church, or he was at work, or he was at home, and he had that bass in his hand. And so he very much, I think, had things that he worshiped. And I didn't look at it in that way at the time. But so my dad was eventually in the bishopric when I was in high school. My parents started to have some problems. One week he was in the bishopric. Next week he was not in the bishopric. Next week he went back to being Catholic. And I remember just thinking, like, that was a little bit of relief for me, because the first time I'm like, I don't have to explain why I don't want to go on a mission. But when my dad left, it was kind of like the backbone of everything. And, you know, the daily prayers stopped, the scripture stopped, the family feeling like family stopped. But I know, like, I was in high school when I remember having a bishop teaching Sunday school one time, I think. And I asked him about, what if I don't want to be a God of my own? What if I don't want to, like, create my own planets and be a God of my own and have all that responsibility? What if that's all just like, what if I'm just full serving? And his response to me was, then you're probably not worthy. And I went, oh. I was like, well, this whole thing kind of just fell apart, because now all of a sudden, like, I don't have to do all of the things that seemingly I'm supposed to do because to get what I want. If I don't feel the need for all of that, then what am I doing all of this for? And I think that got into my head, because this was around all the same time that my dad was leaving. And so there was conversations. There was some things said in private meetings that rubbed him the wrong way from leadership. In high school, occasionally I'd find myself at a party or something, and they'd offer me a drink. They'd ask me, like, why don't I drink? And I'd tell them, oh, it's because I play basketball, right? I should have had a better reason than that. But my senior year, basketball was over. I had a friend who pulled, a couple of wine coolers out of his pocket one day. We were hanging out on a Friday night, and was like, oh, do you want to try one? And I remember thinking, like, why not? And And I remember thinking, oh, this tastes like a soda. I remember my senior year spring break, and I took like 4 beers from a grocery store, and I drank them all, and I got buzzed for the first time. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I was a very anxious kid. And I remember thinking it was the first time I wasn't anxious. It's the first time I was relaxed. The first time I was like, oh, you don't have to feel that way all the time. And it was a handful of days later where I went back, and my first class of the day was weights, and I tore my knee. I tore my meniscus. I had surgery like the next day, and I spent the rest of my senior year in a recliner, and for months in a recliner, healing up. And I had a friend who was like, got a job for me painting apartments, and he was one of the only friends that stayed around when I was in my recliner after knee surgery. All my other friends went serve missions, and he was starting to drink and smoke weed, and so that's who I was kind of left to hang around. But so that was kind of just for a couple of years. It was just drinking occasionally, smoking weed, and hanging out. I started doing music with some guys, and that was kind of life, where I was just working, doing music, smoking weed, and drinking on occasion. And then one day, somebody was breaking a pill on a plate, and turned out to be OxyContin. And in the big scheme of things, it didn't take long before OxyContin turned to everything else, and eventually turned to heroin, and literally everything else that any main drug you could think of. And I was just addicted. Yeah. I was working for the city at the time with the CDL, and I would eventually lose that job. But then I signed up for the Marines because I had 2 brothers that were Marines, and I thought, I got to get out of town. I left, and at the time I was going to mass when I was at boot camp, because I still believe in God, I still believe in Jesus, and I thought, and they were very adamant about that only at boot camp. But, you don't really want to find yourself in a position and not have some kind of relationship with God, and it's hard to not be at boot camp and not have some kind of relationship. But I was there, and I hurt my knee again after 3 months of being there, and I got sent home. So that was 2012. I got sent home with a paycheck, and the only way that I knew how to not make that money run out was to drive out to Salt Lake and come back, and all of a sudden everything's worth twice as much as soon as I crossed that border. And that year I got back, I went to jail and got a DUI and a felony because my mom called the cops on me and said that, I think my son's going out to Salt Lake to buy drugs. And they patrolled my neighborhood until I came back. So I went to jail for first time for about a week, and I got sentenced to like drug court. I would end up relapsing, get arrested again, go back to jail for 3.5 months, get out in 2013. And that was just the revolving door. It was jail, get charges, clean up those charges, be good for a while, get my license back, repeat. About 2016, and my brother was doing work on the Jordan River Temple at the time. And so I was helping him do some carpentry work at that temple when it was being renovated. I was still on and off doing drugs, drinking a lot, and I lose that job, get another job and lose that one because I was relapsing and just using with people at work or people I meet, and to the point where I thought to myself, I'm not even alive anymore. I'm carrying around a shell. Like, who would I be killing if I ended this thing? Right? And in my head, I think I still believe that I was going to go somewhere. That energy cannot be created or destroyed. I just remember sometime in 2018 where I had my last little bit, and I got high, and I remember no one was home, and I pulled the car in the garage, and I closed the door, and I left it running. And my brother, who normally came home at 9 o'clock at night, came home about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and popped the garage after I'd been there a while. And I remember he popped it, gave me a look, and I put it in drive, and I drove off. And I remember thinking, I don't want the cops looking for me. So I came home, and it was a crisis worker that showed up, and we talked, and she got me to go back into treatment, at least see a therapist and go to groups. I remember going one night to a meeting, and I had been drinking, but she suspected because I was just emotional, and she kind of got upset with me for showing up like that. And I thought, well, don't worry, I'll never show up like that again. And this is about 2019, and I remember just drinking again, and I took off to Salt Lake to just go look for something to do, whatever that even meant. And I remember I was drinking so much vodka at the time that I had water bottles placed places underneath the counter and, in the car. And so I had water that I didn't know was vodka because it was next to another water bottle that I was vodka. And I chugged it. And I remember thinking by the time I had taken another 2 shots off of it, thinking, I better find somewhere to park. And I didn't. And I caught my 3rd DUI. And 2 weeks later, I'd catch my 4th. And I go to jail. And this was October 2019. And I wouldn't go to court for it until the end of January 2020. I just remember that October 2019, my grandpa had died Halloween. One of my best friends died on Christmas 2019. And then it was in that January when Kobe died. And I just remember thinking, like, as dumb as that might sound, or as insignificant as it might sound, I was like, all the magic in the world was just kind of gone. I hadn't caught another charge. I lost my license. I was like, I didn't even care about driving anymore. And I think the only thing that kept me like over drinking was always questioning whether I was good enough to drive. So suddenly I wasn't driving anymore, and I was just drinking myself stupid. And I finally realized that I can't quit anymore on my own and physically do it. And so I spent a couple of nights at the hospital, and they sent me home. And that lasted for about a month until I relapsed again in January 2020. And I was drinking when I went to the court, and they wanted me to like check into probation and get an ankle monitor and stuff. And like, I'm not gonna go check in right now. They're gonna probably breathalyze me or whatever. And so I just blew it off. And I thought it'd be better to just get into treatment. That's what's important right now. And I ended up going to detox for the first time, and it was good for me. It took me a week in a positive environment, and took me out of my house. When I came back to my house, and I was like, oh, this isn't normal. And I need to be around like positive people. And so I went back to detox, and they were able to get me into a treatment program. COVID happened while I was there. I remember when we were watching a basketball game, and the season got shut down because of COVID. And so it's kind of funny. Everybody thought that the world was shut down. But when I went to treatment in 2020, I was like, this is the most socializing I've done in the past year or so, because only people that smile at me are the lady at the liquor store. And then I go home. And so for me, it was social adjusting to having to live with, 10 other people in a house. But I was there for 36 days. I graduated, went to the sober living. But I look back now, and there's just everything that was missing in every attempt at recovery, or in every attempt of getting clean. And I eventually, at the sober living, was just going to the gym, going to work, going to after hours meetings, and repeating. And it was just, and I eventually would relapse, and would eventually get myself kicked out of the program. And I went and spent some months, 2020, in San Diego, where my brother and his roommate were at an apartment complex on the other side of a liquor store that didn't close on Sunday, and other things that were going on there. And it just got worse. Eventually came back, and I got myself in another program, and then got myself on probation, and got myself doing well for for most of the year of 2021. And then in October 2021, I relapsed again and drank. And I was remember thinking, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do probation. I don't care about a license. I mean, I don't even know how I'm keeping my sanity on a day-to-day basis. I booked myself a Greyhound bus ticket to go to Northern California. I was totally convinced I was going to go to Northern California and find somebody who needed help growing. And I was going to take off. And my mom didn't like that plan. And she thought going back to San Diego, where my brother was a good idea. And he promised me that his roommate was gone and that things had changed and the environment was different. I got down there and it was not different. His roommate, he said he hadn't seen in 3 weeks, was there the night that I got there, and I did drugs and drank, and I spent the next week obliterated until one of my best friends from high school, who works for Alaska Airlines, told me, just get on a plane and just get to Alaska. And I go up there, and now I'm a two-day plane ride in Cordova, Alaska, with my friends who hadn't just left the church, had gone in a different direction, in their own direction. And it was interesting because while I was up there, I think they were trying to push some of their ideology on me and telling me that some of the things that are holding me back are my beliefs that I'm holding on to. And of course, when somebody does that, they push you towards something. Sometimes it makes you kind of lean more into it because you're like, why are you trying so hard to convince me of something that I'm not even like all devoted to right now anyway? So I have a warrant out for my arrest. And I remember telling my probation officer when I left in October, I said, you need to contact me right now. I'm going off the deep end, and I'm booked a Greyhound bus ticket. I'm leaving town. And I didn't even get anything back until like that February, just to let me, in response, just to let me know I had a warrant out. And so, so I'm out in Alaska, and I try to stay sober, but I'm just relapsing. And then now I've got friends who are drinking, but trying to keep me from drinking. And it's just not working. And it's getting me to try and sneak away from them so I can closet drink. And I end up coming home where I knew that I was like, all right, it's time to take care of this charge. It's time to just go to jail or do what I need to do. And I got myself back to detox. That got me into a program. And it's the program I work for now, actually. But I only went there for 2 weeks. It's called Warrior Spirits through Natsu. And as I'm there, it's my second time in 3 years in treatment on my birthday. And I just remember sitting around in a circle, and I think this is the third year in a row that I'm just sitting around in a circle talking about what happened in the last treatment, and what are all my excuses I drink. And I'm just thinking, like, suddenly it hit me like, I'm not trying to quit drinking. I'm just trying to take care of these charges so I can get back to doing what I was doing and be left alone. And, but while you're there, the program talks about the creator, and they're very much, all built on their well-writing and creator. And I thought to myself, who's this creator? What does it matter? And what's my relationship with him? Like if I'm just some science experiment or I'm no different than any of the other creations, what does it mean to me? And I just remember thinking, I'm not trying to quit. And I don't think me being in the environment that people try to quit is healthy for them either. And I remember wheeling my stuff, my suitcase, all the way from the end of town through town. And I stopped at the liquor store. And I started drinking. And it was about a week and a half after Leave a Warrior Spirit, where I woke up one morning and people in my house woke me up, and I was upset about the noise in my house. And I just remember thinking, oh, how rude. And I'm going to stomp my feet down the stairs on my way to go get my bottle. And I threw the blanket around my shoulders. I took 2 steps down the stairs, and I stepped on the blanket, and it tugged on my shoulder, and it sent me flying down the stairs. And I couldn't get my feet underneath me fast enough. And I remember bumping my nose, bashing my nose, but I don't remember hitting the back of my head. And so the next thing I know, I was in and out of it. And I don't remember the ambulance or the life flight to the U. I just remember waking up at at the University of Utah, and this arm is strapped. My right arm is strapped to the bed, and my neck is in a brace. And I just remember thinking like claustrophobic. I don't like this restraint on me, and I'm not even thinking about why my left side doesn't work. And I get my arm loose from that restraint. I get the neck brace off, and they of course rush in, telling me that my neck could be broken, and they explain to me that my brain is bleeding, and that I've got hemorrhaging in my brain, and that the swelling in my brain is caused so the neurological damage that I'm paralyzed on the left side. And all I'm thinking to myself was, yeah, like I've got stitches on the back of my head for falling into a window well in junior high. Like I've hit my head before. Like I'll be fine. And all I'm thinking is, I've got a bottle downstairs I didn't get to, and I'm going to be withdrawn soon. And, you know, just send me home. And it takes me a minute to really kind of accept the fact that like, I'm going to be here a minute, and that this is kind of a big deal. And, you know, you didn't just bump your head, or this isn't just a concussion. While I was there, I mean, I had migraines. Like the only way I described it while I was there, I was like, it feels like something's inside of my head, like trying to escape out, like claw its way out. And I just remember my eyes and my skull just hurting for days. But while I was there, you know, my dad, as he was, he asked about my relationship with God, and for whatever reason, I had flipping through the channels, and Stephen Furtick came on. And I can't remember what he said or what the sermon was about, but something made me start thinking about it, and about God, about what I've done to myself. Because I think when I was paralyzed, the first thing that everybody thought I'd be most upset about was that I'd never play basketball again. And the first thing that came to my mind was I wouldn't be able to hold my niece. Well, I just robbed my niece of her uncle. She wasn't quite 1 at the time, but I remember when she was born. This is my younger brother. But when his first was born, I just remember thinking, like, I want to be a father, and I don't want my niece to ever see me the way that my other niece and nephews saw me. And she's really helped like change my life, and my relationship with her. It's just so special to me. And I just remember thinking like, what have you done? You know, you've robbed your niece of her uncle, and how selfish. But while you're at the hospital, you know, I'm looking out at every night, and I'm looking at the stars out my window, and I'm thinking about things. And one of the days that I'm there, I remember that voice that spoke to me that day in the truck that told me to turn the wheel. And that voice that I go, that's so soft, but yet so powerful. And it tells me, Joshua, I'm going to heal you, but because I'm not going to give you any excuses. And I just remember like it hitting me and thinking like, whoa, like that's comforting that I feel like this is going to heal, but also that pressure on me of going, but because you know that I know, and feeling like this little charade has gone on long enough. You know, this time of your free agency has gone on long enough, and I know you know. And when you're in the hospital and there's friendly nurses and friendly physical therapists, and you know, you got your own room, and for the most part, I don't really have any visitors or anything, but I can control the mood for the most part in the environment. And I was supposed to be there for a month, but I was only there for a little over 2 weeks because they said I was healing up fast. Well, when I left, I couldn't shrug my shoulder. I could start to like get my hand up on my bicep a little bit, but it was just dead in the socket. And I remember just thinking, well, now I can't go to the gym, I can't lift, I can't play basketball, I can't play my drums, I can't do anything. I'm just sitting in a chair watching television, waiting to go to my first follow-up appointment. And I think, well, maybe my brain's healed enough for a tall boy. And I went and got one and thought, well, that was nice. And then that went on for about a week and a half. And beer after a few days turned into vodka again. I eventually had to tell my mom, I was like, by the way, Mom, like I've kind of been drinking again, and I think I need to kind of taper off. And so she supported me trying to go to the store and wing down July 3rd. And I just remember waking up July 4th and all the anxiety and all of the, not so much physical withdrawals, but just like all the anxiety and a little bit of my temperature being off. And I was trying to fight it because I knew that like I had a upcoming appointment, and I didn't want to look stupid going to the doctor drinking after a brain injury, right? That would be ridiculous. And but I tried to quit as I'm going throughout the day, and I'm trying to fight like my anxiety rising, and each time it's rising, I'm like losing my breath with anxiety, like having these panic attacks. And I just remember all of a sudden the arm that didn't work had a life of its own and started to move and started to shoot out and started to feel like somebody had me and snapping my elbow, like bending it the other way. And I remember yelling at my mom, Mom, I don't know what's happening. I can't get it to stop, and it hurts so bad. And I tried to put pressure against the couch and lean all my weight against the couch. And I just remember, I guess I went to the floor, turned stiff and blue with my eyes propped open. And my mom goes out the front door screaming because it's the 4th of July. The old bishop across the street, kitty corner, was outside, and he heard her. And he come running in. I guess he adjusted me and got me to breathe again, because when I came to and opened my eyes, the cops and the paramedics were standing over me. And I went to the hospital that day, and they told me it was a seizure. But to this day, there was something darker in that moment. There was something that had possession of my body. That was far scarier than being paralyzed. Is not having it do something when you want to do something. It's totally different than having it do something when you want it to stop. And I just remember thinking that was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. And whatever I have to take to make sure that never happens again. So I remember going home that afternoon from the hospital and thinking, for the first time in years, I'm going to have to find a source of strength beyond myself. And I remember a few times my grandpa's red letter Bible. I remember being in detox one time and coming home, and for whatever reason, something must have got bumped, but it got knocked off the shelf across the room, and it fell open to the genealogy part, like right in the middle of this genealogy page that he had. There'd just be times like that where it would be feeling like this thing's calling for me to read it, and I'd ignore it. And then this has happened, and I remember thinking to myself, I don't know anybody who seems to be well-versed in this book who doesn't seem to have their life together, for the most part. And so I thought that might be a good place to start for wisdom and strength. And I just remember thinking, I'm going to start reading. Disclosure and disclaimer on this part of my story, because it's not how I would recommend or suggest people go about their spiritual journey. But when I realized like I couldn't drink anymore, and I had a behavioral tech one time in detox who mentioned me about ketamine, and now that was helpful to him. I thought, well, ketamine is just trying to mimic psilocybin, and maybe I'll just make my own medicine. And so I had a friend who was going to church at the time, but he was well versed in growing mushrooms. And so I had this science project, for lack of better words right now, that for me, I thought I was going to infuse with good energy. At the time, it was my motivation to read every day. Every day I now had this thing growing in the dark that I needed to like infuse with words out loud. And it got me to read my scriptures. And when I would start reading my scriptures again, I told myself, don't just read them quietly, like find a place to read them as if you are telling a story, like with emotion and passion. And all of a sudden, the words started to come to life. Things that you'd heard 1,000 times all of a sudden had meaning and all of a sudden made sense. I was also listening to the Jordan Peterson psychological significance of the Bible while I was reading along with Genesis and Exodus, and I thought those were very helpful to me. And as I was reading, there's a part in his lectures where he mentions mushrooms and an ancient painting of Adam and Eve in the garden where the serpent is connected off onto things that look like magic mushrooms. And there's some things that happen while I'm doing it where I'm thinking, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. But I'm thinking like, whatever, brushing it off. But I get into about Deuteronomy because I'm thinking to myself, I don't know nearly much about this book as I thought I did. And I get to read about Joseph in Egypt, and I'm breaking down in tears because I'm thinking like all the things I went through, he worked everything out for your good. And I'd never gone through anything bad because even the bad things worked out for my good. But I get to Deuteronomy and I think maybe I should open up that other book because I had no intention on reading the Book of Mormon or going back to any organized religion. And there were things that in the lectures that he was saying about, like, can you really be sane on your own? And so it got me to open up the Book of Mormon again. I thought, I'm going to read cover to cover for the first time, not because someone else told me to. And like I said, I'm suddenly studying scripture for the first time because I need to know what's in here. I get to the beginning parts of the testimonies, and it's just like flooding me. And I'm going like, I just know it's true. But like I said, I've got my science experiment going, and I think to myself one day after my first little flush of it, that maybe it is a good time to try these. And so I try them, and I was like studying on how like all their clinical setups of those go and how they blindfold people and like guide them and ask them questions and stuff. So my friend had made the suggestion about keeping my eyes closed. And I was like, yeah, I noticed that they do that in their clinical setting, so I'll do that. And so I had my little experience, and I wondered to myself, like, should I go to sacrament meeting with my mom for an hour, go to mass with my dad for an hour, just to get some church in, get some, spirituality in. And I remember that voice that came to me and said, Joshua, you already know what to do. And I just remember feeling like that ringing so true. Like they talk about the ego being gone. They talk about like not having an ego. And when he said, like, you already know what to do, I went, yep, you're right. I do. But I'm still trying to get myself to ask these questions. When I first started, and I was asking myself this, was I saw the Virgin Mary, like, as clear as day and like beautiful colors, but it was like an image, like the image with the hands together, and it didn't have life to it. It was just an image. And then immediately after that, and like, I mean, I had like this face in front of me in the form of a shadow that looked right at me, like it had substance to look back at me with, and it spooked me, and I opened my eyes, and the shadow on the wall had horns on it. I remember thinking, like, they don't have bodies. They can't hurt you. All they can do is scare you. And I remember thinking what I was told as a kid about sticking your hand out, and thinking like they can't touch you, but they'll try to scare you, and that this is what you came here for. This is what you wanted. And so I'm going through the roller coaster of emotions of breaking down, crying, but good crying, and getting anxiety and going, what about mom and dad? What about my brothers? And every time I would like have this anxiety rise, that voice would come back and go, Joshua, I will show you how. This kind of repeated over and over again, was that you already know what to do, and I will show you how. But this very clear message of, but don't do this again. Don't come looking for me this way again. So I thought, well, I guess it's probably time to go back to church or time to do whatever, but I'm still growing. I've still got ounces of this stuff and it's still growing more. And I'm thinking like, maybe because the brain injury, and I'm reading about neuroplasticity, and I'm thinking of all the excuses of how this could be beneficial to me in microdosing and stuff. Maybe a couple weeks later, I thought the brain injury and I tried to microdose, and what I took shouldn't have probably done anything to me. And I just remember it was the darkest experience I ever had, where I felt like evil all around me. I felt like I was all in my sins, and I felt like I was all alone. And that voice that came to me that said, I told you not to. I told you not to. And I was like, yeah, you did. And my bad. And I'm going to have to white knuckle this for the next, I don't know how many hours. And I remember I got home, and I remember telling my mom, I was like, Mom, I did something I wasn't supposed to do, and I'm paying the price for it right now, and I'm in a bad place. So if I'm acting weird, just know what, like, this is what's going on. And as she often does when she doesn't know how to deal with me, she just kind of went to her room and closed the door. And I was like, now I'm all alone, and I just kind of wandering around the house. And I remember being in the kitchen and it just becoming too much. And I dropped to my knees and I was like, God, if you can help me out right now. I know you told me not to, but if you could help me out right now, I swear I will burn them. I will destroy them. I won't give them to anyone else. And I said some other things, but by the time I finished in his name and got off my knees, it just all went away. And I just remember thinking, okay, like I felt like it went away because he knew how sincere and how serious I was. And so it's just like, that was an agreement right then and there. That was like, this is done. We're done with this stuff. We're done. We're going back to church. And it was like the week after that, I went with my friend to sacrament meeting, January 2023, to his ward, because I didn't want to go back to mine yet. Then I went back, and it was that first Sunday there. And it was all that familiar. I hear the stories on the show, and I hear other people who have left and come back, and that feeling of familiar, and that familiar of being home. And for one of the first times being there and like, don't focus on the people. You're not there to focus on anything other than what you're there to focus on. That next week, it was the first Sunday of February 2023, and I decided I was going to go back to my ward for the first time. And my mom told me, she said, well, if you go back, I got to go back. And so she went back with me. She never really left, but she just kind of been less active, working on Sundays and stuff. But she went back with me, and I remember telling myself, like, I'm not going to get up to bear my testimony or anything. Like, nobody wants to hear from me. But next thing you know, I was there, standing, my legs were moving towards the stand, and I'm bearing my testimony and saying, like, look, I've been away for 17 years, and I finally read the Book of Mormon for myself. So I got up before my testimony, and it was, I think the next week they asked me to teach Elders Forum. They extended calling in young men to be a Teachers Forum advisor. I think the next week after that, I got my patriarchal blessing. And later, that October 28th, 2023, I got my endowments out. And I went to the Jordan River Temple. I went there because I remember working on it when it was being renovated, and I was not a good person. I didn't belong near that temple. I didn't belong near that building, even working on it. I didn't have the respect or the reverence that it deserved, but I thought it was fitting. That's where I went back to get my endowments. Was that same one that I had helped work on. So, and since then, I've been human. I've lost my recommend. I had to go through the repentance process and get it back again. So I had to go through the repentance and get it back in 2025. And it's one of those things where, I mean, now I feel like I could never let anything take it away from me again. Things happen, life happens, and I've had things happen where I get discouraged, but at the end of the day, even after a hard week of something, Sunday rolls around and I think, who are you kidding? There is no other path to take. There is no other God to serve. There is no other way to live. And so no matter how many times I fall short and I get discouraged, and I'll be 39 on the 7th of April this year. And, I'm single. I live with my mom, and from the outside perspective, life probably hasn't changed a whole lot. I've got money in my bank account now, and I mean, I've got a car, a motorcycle, and a good job that I enjoy. My patriarchal blessing talks about developing a career in which I can provide service to others and help them come unto Christ. So this Sunday is Palm Sunday, and I get to speak on Sunday about the atonement of Jesus Christ and and my journey on the covenant path.
You're the perfect person to speak on Palm Sunday.
It's funny because the last Fast Sunday that we did, there was this long pause, right, in the middle of it. And I hadn't borne my testimony in a couple of months. And I just remember, like, the Spirit telling me, this is your opportunity to get up. And so I got up and bore my testimony, and I just, it's one of those things, like, you love doing it. But you almost feel unworthy sometimes, like when I'm asked to speak, or I'm asked to, like, be this representative of this church and of this gospel and of my Savior. And I talk about when I came back and I started reading, and one of the scriptures that I can't read to this day without crying is Smallze 27. And when it talks about, like, I was in the gall of bitterness, but now I behold the marvelous light of God. And when it says, I rejected my Redeemer. Even when I read those words now and I say them, I rejected my Redeemer. every time. Like it pushes on that spot. And now it's so hard for me and I try to have so much compassion, especially working in the field of treatment and everything, of going like, how was there a time when I was like that? People ask me about my Lakers tattoo and how come I don't finish it? And I say, it hit me one day about what I worked at, that I made false gods out of things. And I didn't see it that way at the time. I didn't know on Sunday that my desire to go out and play basketball, or my desire to watch basketball games was worship. How I spend my time, what I spend my time on is what I worship. I mean, it's pretty simple. And when I realized that for years I put a Kobe Bryant jersey on me and I took another man's name upon me, but every Sunday I was taking the sacrament, those covenants where I wasn't taking his name upon me. And all of a sudden it was like, I don't wear my jerseys anymore. I still like basketball. I still love basketball, but like all of a sudden, whether my team wins or loses or not, it's not affecting who I am. All of a sudden my identity is not wrapped up in any past or present circumstance or any material possession I have. Like that time at Warrior Spirit when I wanted to know so what if I'm a creation? So what if he's creator? Like when I realized that my creator is my savior and that, what is love? Love is sacrifice. And who sacrifices the most for me was Jesus Christ. And that just changed everything. And all of a sudden when he became God, he became the Father, my mom wasn't my mom anymore. My dad wasn't my dad anymore. My brothers, my sister, my friends, all of a sudden they were his daughters, his sons, out of my possession. And all of a sudden there was a different reverence to it. There was a different way I treated things. And I mean, and every day I still wake up and I remember what it was like to have to prop my arm next to the pillow, because I couldn't roll over one way or the other or sit up on my own. I still, on those mornings when I wake up and go, oh, I'm tired, I'm going back to sleep, but I sit up, I go, it's a miracle. And this hand that, when I went back to the doctors and the doctor told me that I'd made a miraculous recovery, and my patriarchal blessing talks about the effects of your accident will not be long-term and you will regain your strength to become a mighty power.
Wow.
I mean, on Sunday I looked at the picture on the pulpit. I think it was the angel and Mary at the tomb. And I just remember thinking, like, the other day, like, he lives. And like, I don't know how often I really let that sink in, that he lives, but like, he's so real. And words cannot do justice of like what I was and what, especially when you have the truth and you lose the truth, and how dark the world can be and how hopeless everything was. And like I said, I think from the outside, all the things that I have, they're not that impressive. I think people see me and think, why is he happier than I am? How can he still live with mom and still be in these certain situations and be happier than he's ever been? And, like I said, I'm single. I still occasionally get discouraged about the things that I don't have or what I don't see on the horizon, but I know that this life is learning to work and to serve, and it's all about, I can either be a slave to one guy in the next life or I can be a servant to the other. If I can just work at doing good continually, like, my day is just so much more simple and things are easier, because I think I used to do good for the reward. And I remember thinking, if I just do good for goodness sake and let being good be its own reward, and all of a sudden the blessings just started coming in, and all of a sudden life started changing. And life wasn't so hard, and I started paying my tithing again. My finances, my credit score is all fixed, right?
Isn't that amazing how that happens?
Yeah. Everything changed. I changed the music I listened to. I changed the shows I watched. And to me, that was vital for me. I think the music's always so subconscious sometimes. It can be on the background. But when I changed the music I listened to, when I changed the media content, it helped me change my thoughts, how I saw things. I saw, especially like after that little experience I had where I was in that dark place and had to pray my way out of it, I felt very sensitive for months about, like, if something wasn't good, like blatantly good, it was deemed in the other category. There was no more like, well, it's not bad. Maybe it's not good, but it's not bad either. There was no more playing that game of, and that's why, like, I love this painting that I have of these missionaries, because it shows the shadow, and I just remember thinking one day of like wanting, like, Lord, take this thing I'm struggling, take this away from me. And I remember thinking, like, maybe that's the wrong way to pray. Like, maybe if I just prayed, hey, bring me closer, because the light will shine away the darkness. And instead of, like, we've heard things before about trying to scoop out darkness, I just remember thinking, like, okay, and the closer I get to the light, and where I'm facing depends on where the darkness is and the shadows are. And the more light you get, the more defined the shadows are. And the more light and dark are obvious, and truth and lies are. Anyway, that's my story. Like I said, I haven't been perfect. I've had some things I struggle with. But like my Nephi, oh wretched man that I am, but nevertheless, in whom I have trusted. And I think that's what I've been holding on to lately. And it hit me yesterday or the day before, and it's what hit me when I was getting sober. Was I've been trying to hold everything up on my own and put everything on my shoulders, and when I actually like let God, let Christ, let the angels hold me up, like I feel like I'm weightless.
Yeah.
It's just like the weights don't get lighter; you have to get stronger.
Man, you embody what the Comeback Podcast is. Like, just to hear where you started, and then like hear who you are today, and like it embodies the Comeback Podcast. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share your story with us. And you are an amazing human being, and clearly God has a lot of work that he wants you to do. And there is a reason that you've gone through what you've gone through, and that you are who you are. And I know this, sharing your story on the podcast is going to help so many people, but it's very evident that you have a major work to do on this earth. I'm grateful and feel honored that we have the opportunity to have you on the podcast. So thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Surf Clothing is one of our favorite brands. They have been supporting us since the very beginning. We love them so much. I think one of the things that I like about Surf so much is that my husband is literally obsessed, and I brought him in here to share his experience with Surf Clothing. So Jesse, tell us.
I love Surf Clothing. This is the best shirt that I've ever owned for church and professional purposes. It's got four-way stretch, which makes it really nice because not all the time I'm at my desk. Oftentimes I'm moving and out and about. So it's really nice to have a flexible shirt that moves with me. I know that it's got a mesh collar that I love. I think the purpose of that is really to prevent stains, but it's also super comfortable. It's way more comfortable around my neck. You know, if I'm at church or in business meetings with a tie, or whether I don't have a tie, it's really comfortable. It's got arm vents, which I love because I'm kind of a bigger fella. It helps me so that I can be a bit breathable, and I love it.
And also, you can get 15% off a shirt from Serve by using the code COMEBACK.
A lot of people have asked us how they can support the podcast, and we have created a Comeback Podcast merch line on our website, www.comebackpodcast.org. All of the money made from the merch goes right back into the podcast. So if you are interested in supporting the podcast and you want to purchase some merch, we would love it. Check it out. Thank you so much for being a supporter of the Comeback Podcast and listening to our episodes. It would mean so much to us if you would like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It helps other people be able to find us, and we want to share this message to everyone.